In the years leading up to Caesar's Gallic War, Rome was a republic in turmoil. Though it had long been the dominant power in the Mediterranean, internally the political structure of the republic was crumbling under the weight of corruption, class conflict, and military ambition. The Senate, once the stabilizing force of Roman governance, had become a battlefield for aristocratic families vying for control. The ideals of the republic, balanced governance, shared power, and the rule of law, were increasingly replaced by ruthless political maneuvering, populist appeals, and personal vendettas. The rise of powerful individuals who commanded armies loyal to them personally, rather than to the Senate or the Roman people, had begun to reshape the nature of power in the Republic. This transformation had begun decades earlier with figures like Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Their civil wars, proscriptions, and constitutional reforms left deep scars on Roman politics. By the 60s BC, the memory of Sulla's dictatorship still haunted the Roman psyche, yet his example had also opened the door for new men to seek domination through military force. At the center of this shifting landscape stood Gaius Julius Caesar, a patrician by birth but a populist by strategy. He was ambitious, charismatic, and deeply in debt. His early career had shown flashes of brilliance, serving as quaestor in Hispania, Pontifex Maximus, and eventually as consul in 59 BC, but he was still not secure in the hierarchy of Roman power. Caesar needed wealth, military glory, and time to build a stronger political base. He saw his opportunity not in Rome, but beyond it, in the fields, forests, and tribal strongholds of Gaul. But Caesar was not acting in a vacuum. The political world he inhabited was shaped by a tangled web of alliances, rivalries, and deals made in dark corners. In 60 BC, Caesar formed an unofficial political alliance with two of Rome's most powerful men, Marcus Licinius Crassus and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known to history as Crassus and Pompey. This arrangement would later be called the First Triumvirate. Crassus was the wealthiest man in Rome, a shrewd financier and political operator with immense resources and ambitions. Pompey was Rome's greatest living general, fresh from his eastern campaigns and hungry for legitimacy and land for his veterans. Together, the three men agreed to support each other's aims. Crassus would use his money to support Caesar. Pompey would use his influence and military prestige. Caesar, in turn, would work to pass legislation favorable to them both. This alliance was not based on friendship or ideology. It was purely transactional, a temporary union of ambition, but it would shape the course of Roman history. Caesar's consulship in 59 BC was marked by controversy and aggression. He pushed through land reforms for Pompey's veterans, ratified Pompey's eastern settlements, and satisfied many of Crassus's economic interests. But in doing so, he alienated the Senate, inflamed the conservative optimates, and stirred open conflict in the streets of Rome. Political debate gave way to mob violence. Clodius and Milo, two notorious gang leaders and politicians, turned the Roman Forum into a battleground. The Senate grew increasingly dysfunctional. In this chaos, Caesar made his move. As his consulship neared its end, Caesar needed a secure post to avoid prosecution by his enemies. He negotiated with the Triumvirate and secured an unprecedented 5-year proconsular command over Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and later Transalpine Gaul, effectively giving him control over a vast military theater stretching from northern Italy to the frontiers of Gaul. This was no mere governorship. It was a platform for conquest. At the same time, the Roman army was undergoing profound changes. During the Republic's early centuries, legions were raised from landowning citizens who served out of duty to the state. But by the 1st century BC, that model had eroded. Now soldiers were drawn from the landless poor, who saw the army as a path to wealth and status. Their loyalty was no longer to the Senate, but to the generals who led them, paid them, and promised them land. Caesar understood this perfectly. He would mold his legions into a loyal, professional fighting force, one that would march with him not only across Gaul, but eventually against Rome itself. Yet even as Caesar laid the groundwork for his campaigns, the broader republic continued to spiral. The Optimates, the conservative aristocrats in the Senate, fought to preserve their dominance. They saw Caesar as a threat to the republic's traditions and feared his populist appeal. Meanwhile, the populares, those who sought power by appealing to the masses, embraced Caesar's style of leadership. The divide between the Senate's authority and the will of the people widened daily. Rome's provinces were also increasingly restive. Governors appointed by the Senate often exploited their positions for personal gain, leading to rebellions and instability. The Senate lacked the means or the will to check their abuses. Corruption was rampant. Tax collectors known as publicani squeezed the provinces for revenue, and judicial reform lagged far behind. The Republic was slowly losing control of its empire. Amid this instability, violence became a normal part of Roman politics. Elections were rigged, votes were bought, and candidates used private gangs to intimidate rivals. Streets in Rome ran with blood during election seasons. The idea of a peaceful transfer of power had all but vanished. Political ambition was pursued not through debate and lawmaking, but through intimidation, bribery, and, when necessary, open force. This atmosphere of chaos and uncertainty provided both the justification and the opportunity for Caesar's military campaigns. By promising to defend Roman interests, to pacify Gaul, and to bring glory to the Republic, Caesar could present himself as a protector of Rome's greatness, even as he amassed personal power. His enemies warned of tyranny, but many ordinary Romans admired his boldness, his eloquence, and his promise of conquest. In this volatile setting, Gaul became more than a frontier. It was a crucible in which Caesar could forge a new Roman identity, centered not on the old aristocracy, but on strength, charisma, and the ability to deliver victory. Caesar was not the only one to see this. Many senators watched with concern, but few had the courage or the means to stop him. Even within the triumvirate, tensions were growing. Crassus and Pompey mistrusted each other. Caesar's rising popularity made him a rival, not an equal. The alliance, never stable to begin with, began to fray. Crassus longed for military glory to match Pompey and Caesar, and he would eventually launch his ill-fated campaign against the Parthians. Pompey, once the darling of the Senate, began to drift toward the conservative faction, uneasy with Caesar's unchecked power. But in the early years, their alliance held, and as Caesar departed for Gaul, he left behind a Rome that was brimming with conflict, corruption, and ambition. His enemies believed he would be gone for years, bogged down in tribal warfare. They underestimated him. Caesar, however, understood exactly what was at stake. As he crossed into Gaul in 58 BC, he brought with him not only legions and banners, but a clear vision. Victory in Gaul would bring him the wealth to pay his debts, the military glory to rival Alexander, and the political capital to challenge even the Senate itself. It would be the stage on which he would redefine what it meant to be Roman. Behind him, Rome remained fractured. The Senate could barely agree on legislation. The people were disillusioned with the ruling class. Grain shortages, economic uncertainty, and rising crime had made life in the capital precarious. Into this vacuum of authority, strongmen like Caesar found space to rise. The institutions of the Republic, stretched and battered, would never fully recover. Even as Caesar began his campaigns, he remained deeply engaged with Roman politics. Through letters, envoys, and propaganda, he shaped how his victories were received in Rome. His Commentary de Bello Gallico, written in clear, persuasive Latin, was both military report and political manifesto. It justified his actions, glorified his achievements, and painted the Gauls as barbaric threats to Roman security. In doing so, Caesar ensured that his war would not just be fought on the fields of Gaul, but in the hearts and minds of Romans back home. Meanwhile, other ambitious men maneuvered to fill the power vacuum. Senators like Cato the Younger railed against Caesar's growing influence. Cicero, the great orator and former consul, walked a careful line, admiring Caesar's intellect but fearing his ambition. Political alliances shifted constantly. What remained consistent was the sense that the Republic stood on a knife's edge. In hindsight, the years before the Gallic War seemed like the calm before a storm, but for those living through them, they were already years of political chaos and erosion. Caesar's decision to march into Gaul was not merely about expanding Rome's borders, it was about seizing destiny. He saw the fragility of the system, the hunger of the people, and the fears of the elite, and he acted. The Gallic War would provide him with a platform unlike any other. It would elevate him from ambitious politician to military titan. It would unsettle the balance of power in the Roman world and set the Republic on a path toward dictatorship and eventual collapse. But before any of that could happen, Rome had to give him the command, and it did, because in a world of violence, uncertainty, and ambition, Caesar was not the exception. He was the inevitable outcome.